1999 is often cited as being one of the best years in film history, from mainstream stuff to Oscar nominations, a whole bunch of things. Absolutely magnificent and have stayed within the pop culture discussion. There's one movie, though, from 1999 that I think we need to be talking about a whole lot more. Because for all the movies that came out in 1999, only one of them has a magical crab. And that movie is Simply Irresistible.
Literally named Simply Irresistible, but also it is quite irresistible.
You will find out just how Simply Irresistible is on this episode of GenreVision. Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision.
GenreVision is a weekly movie club where we discuss horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more.
Yes, it is time to continue May is Magical Month with, I don't know, maybe our most magical movie so far. Maybe of the whole month, we'll find out. It's Simply Irresistible, starring Sarah Michelle Gellar and Sean Patrick Flannery. Flannery.
Flannery.
This is a movie that this is my first rewatch of it, and this is Travis's first viewing of it. When we were talking about doing the May is Magical Month, magic is a very broad, vague term, and we kind of took it on ourselves that we wanted to vary up the kinds of movies we were doing. And so Simply Irresistible, I think, it's fair to say, as far as the regular GenreVision stuff goes, it's out of our wheelhouse. This is a romantic comedy that was very clearly targeted towards a female demographic. It's a pretty straight. I hesitate using the term straightforward, but in its intention, I think, as far as the marketing and the people that allowed it to happen, it's a straightforward intention. Like, yeah, this is a sweet, easy rom-com.
It absolutely is. I mean, if you look at it from the standpoint of like basic construction, like the pillars of the film are recognizable if you look at the rom-com formula for 90s and early 2000s. Like, rom-coms in this state as new releases don't really exist anymore. They've been pushed off of theatrical screens, and not just due to COVID. They've gone to other markets. They've gone to the Hallmark Channel. They've gone to certain streaming services. But I mean, the Hallmark Channel has this market cornered because they have a certain formula to their movies that people have come to depend on and like. And there's no judgment there. I understand that people are getting what they want out of these movies. But like, if you look at Simply Irresistible from a far distance and you go, okay, yeah, the basics of that structure's there. Okay, that's not an incorrect statement. If you just look at the posters for this movie, it's like two smiling faces, hands on cheeks
over a cityscape. It's the Sleepless in Seattle poster. It's serendipity. It's that kind of thing. And a lot of movies in that genre, particularly from past time periods, they actually are doing some kind of weird genre things often. There's some magical element. There's time travel, or the Lake House, for example.
Sure.
There's a weird sci-fi, fantasy, magical, goopery thing going on there. And so I think a lot of the times the way these movies are sold actually undercut the more interesting genre elements that are going on in them. And when it comes to Simply Irresistible, I don't even know if you can call them genre elements. They're mad person elements.
Well, I've seen this movie referred to as magical realism, and I cannot disagree more. Drew, I know you have your issues with considering things to be magical realism.
More so that, like, specifically for this, like, I understand the argument for the term. I just disagree with it. But there is no, like, this is not a contender for the magical realism debate.
No, this is fantasy. And the movie is better for it. It's not like it's a really indulgent genre picture. It's not high fantasy. There aren't elves and orcs wandering around like that. But the movie indulges in some straight up magical nonsense and constructs a world that is so clearly its own. Like it's its own little pocket universe where the rules of physics and things just don't apply, even in the ways that we normally accept the movies. Like, we were talking about, like, there's a certain level of bullshit that you have to put up with in movies just because we've all accepted that movies have their own little unrealistic things. It's like, yeah, okay, all right, we get that people don't say goodbye on the telephone in movies. They just hang up. We get that.
People splash water on their faces and look, thoughtfully into a bathroom mirror.
Right.
Like
the
tropes.
bell in class is going to ring at exactly the right time every single time. We understand these beats, and they form the language and they form the emotional shorthand of cinema. And they're often borrowed from previous movies and recycled to the point where it's tough to know where they even originated. But this, even with its more formulaic aspects, I was really surprised at how original it felt, because it has a lot of influences, some of them quite literary, like astonishingly so, and it wears them all on its sleeve.
Yeah, I mean, it's not afraid to straight up quote that its inspirations are coming from things like an MGM musical, which a character says.
Sure.
That there are multiple references to Fred Astaire movies. This, so far from everything we're saying, sounds like, okay, it's a highly reference-heavy ode to a certain era of fantastical movies from, the 40s and 50s, where there was a more accepted level of fantasy going on in seemingly, magical realism settings and stuff. But that does not do justice to the particular magical elements going on in Simply Irresistible.
What this movie is, I think, for me at its core, is ancient Greek stage comedy. It's a story about divine intervention into the lives of normal, very mundane, kind of like sappy people, and they are given some sort of divine spark, intervention by the gods. And while the movie plays kind of coy with that, the movie is so rooted in stage drama. Like, it's kind of a quirky New York stage play, very much like made by New York people. There's a lot of East Coast New York actors in it, like recognizable faces, but not Hollywood people.
Okay, I mean, the big department store they film at is a notable, here's the thing, is that the movie kicks off with a magical angel type character whose name is Gene O'Reilly, which I really wanted to find out, like, that has to be a reference. Like, it just feels so specific. And from everything we researched about this movie, I'm like, that name cannot be an accident. And this character, played by playwright, as you so noted, Christopher Durang, shows up to give a magical crab to Sarah Michelle Gellar, who is a young, sort of beaten down chef at a very small kind of, hole in the wall restaurant that used to be owned by her mother. And she's not a very good cook. And the film opens with her going through, farmer's market type place, trying to get ingredients and stuff. And this magical, I think he's wearing a white suit in the beginning. But regardless, this magical man shows up with a bucket of crabs, peaky toes. Very specifically, we should note peaky toes.
That's a type of crab. Yeah.
I just know that the screenwriter for this movie was very adamant about pointing out that they were called peaky toes.
I think she just likes that word. By the way, the screenwriter is somebody named Judith Roberts, and she is married to the director, Mark Tarlov. They made this movie together. They conceived this movie together, and their kind of style is immediately apparent in this market scene. So Christopher Durang's angel character appears to Amanda and says, "Take my crabs, Amanda.
Take my crabs." I also want to note again, this is the screenwriter. This is the screenwriter Judith Roberts' only feature credit as a writer.
Yeah.
So anyways, yes. Eventually, Amanda, the character played by Sarah Michelle Gellar, Gellar rather, takes this bucket of crabs. One of the crabs is a very special crab, and he scuttles out of the bucket and ends up going over to Sean Patrick Flannery's character, who is some sort of business mogul who is opening a restaurant. And the crab pinches him on the toes as Sarah Michelle Gellar is crawling under tables trying to find him. And this is immediately our meet cute, like to the point where when Sean Patrick Flannery's character, whose name is Tom, is about to walk away, we cut to a little shot of the crab holding on to the leg of his pants, like keeping him there. Immediately, it's like, all right, what's going on?
Yeah, there's a sense in this first scene where you're like, oh, I guess we're off to the races, because it's our inciting incident and our meet cute in the very first scene of the film.
Before the credits have stopped rolling.
Yeah, so, there's a tiny little bit of setup for either of them, and just the scantest bit of like a little bit of dialogue for Tom that you kind of get what's going on with him, and a tiny little bit of Sarah Michelle Gellar, Gellar's character, like, oh, it's a family restaurant. It's been in their family for 70 years, and now it's not doing so well. There's this big lummoxy mushroom vendor who keeps having to slap his son because the son keeps saying things like, "You're going out of business, right?" Or whatever the fuck. So Amanda takes these crabs back to her restaurant, her family restaurant, which is called Southern Cross. And there we meet the other family member that is helping her operate this restaurant. It's her aunt, played by Betty Buckley. And I knew I recognized Betty Buckley. I was like, where the hell have I seen her? She's the doctor in Split. I think she appears in Glass as well. But I was like, oh, I loved her in Split. Like, I was really happy to see her here.
This movie has people in it. Yeah. Like not only is Sarah Michelle Gellar and Sean Patrick Flannery, who, totally notable, but then you have somebody like Betty Buckley shows up. And then the sous chef, who's like the only other employee at the Southern Cross, whose name is Nolan, is played by Lawrence Gilliard Jr., who most people will know as D'Angelo from the first season of The Wire. Mm-hmm. Patricia Clarkson and Dylan Baker are in this movie. And oh my God, like we could spend the whole episode just talking about them.
Yeah, Amanda Pete's got a small role in the movie. And she shows up shortly thereafter. Like after we get the first bit of Sarah Michelle Gellar hanging out at the Southern Cross with her aunt and talking about like how dire business is, we cut to Sean Patrick Flannery's character, and Patricia Clarkson is, I don't know, his assistant, but she doesn't seem to be in like a very subservient role to him. Like she's very much kind of a mother figure for this guy.
Right.
And she does not hesitate to give him shit, which is great because hell yeah, Patricia Clarkson. She's gorgeous in this movie, by the way. Oh my God.
She's gorgeous. She's funny. Like as wild as this movie is, and it's wild, I think the majority of the cast are actually really good at executing what this bizarro movie wants them to do.
Yeah, it's every movie I think requires a bit, maybe a whole lot of like trust and belief in what you're doing. Like, of course, there's the number on the check that they give you that certainly helps with that. But there are performances in this movie that I feel are like invested in the material. Flannery, for instance, I don't know. There's something about his performance that seems very sincerely willing to meet the movie on its level.
He's legit tapping into the kind of goofy, bumbling, romantic lead character that you would often see. And we'll talk about when I get to my shelf pick. He's not sleepwalking. Like he's there, he's present, and he's doing exactly the nutso stuff that this movie wants him to do, because his character has the basic setup of these characters is very familiar in no matter which role is being played. He's the super organized business type guy, and she's the klutzy creative type. That is a very familiar rom-com pairing of character types.
Right. It's a dynamic we understand because we've seen it and continue to see it in like Hallmark movies.
Exactly. It's an opposites attract type thing. It makes total sense. But the way that they decide to specify those quirks are where you get into the oddness of Simply Irresistible. For example, Sean Patrick Flannery's character, Tom, is so organized that he has graphed and charted his levels of happiness with the different dates that he's had. And he has this theory that after the fourth date, his happiness always slumps off. So he's like, after 4 dates, that's it. And we see this, like he shows this chart on a TV. He also has a bizarre fascination with paper airplanes. There's paper airplane decor all over his office. He's got computer generated models because he's trying to perfect the perfect paper airplane so he can break the paper airplane distance record. This is the things where it's like the specificity is what gets you leaning into the movie and squinting your eyes and going, what am I seeing here?
Yeah, it is strangely specific. And what's really fascinating is like reading interviews with the director and the screenwriter now, like it's very clear that they've thought about what these things represent metaphorically, like the crab or the paper airplanes. Is the movie trying to make an argument for these things as like really strong metaphors that mean a lot to the film? No, I mean, there is one thing that the movie is clearly trying to do. Like you'll notice, you're like, oh, the movie is trying to say something about this because there's a mirror in almost every scene. Almost every interior scene has a mirror in it.
Well, I mean, again, we could spend the whole episode just talking about the interviews we read about this movie.
Oh my God.
The director is so literate and like professorial with his analyzing of every aspect of the movie. And it's clear that, like you're saying with the mirror thing, there's an intention there. Before we read anything with them, you had said, it's like, man, there's a lot of mirrors in this movie. Like that seems that can't be a mistake. And it's like, you read interviews with them. He's like, well, you know, we wanted to put these mirrors because the movie is about like reflect. What are we reflecting about ourselves? Who are we?
Sure.
And it's all this, like I said to you, is like, if this dude gazes any longer at his navel, his head's going to get stuck in it. I think it might already be.
What's funny about like reading interviews with the director, Mark Tarlov, like particularly the interview that Slash Film did with him, is he sounds like he knows what he's talking about if you look at the broad strokes of it. But like, if you try to read a paragraph of the stuff that he says about this movie, you're like, wait. And then you reread it and you're like, what is this fucking guy actually talking about? He's off his nut.
He's talking about like Einsteinian theories about time and space and stuff. And I would love to, if you're listening out there and you've not seen Simply Irresistible, I want to run a little experiment. Search for these interviews with the writer and director, read them, and then see the movie.
Yeah, see if half of what he's fucking talking about shows up. He's talking about things like, oh, we wanted to explore the way that like food and wine can like bend time, and you know, time seems relative. Like when you're with someone you love, like, you know, the whole idea of time stretching. I'm like, yeah, I can kind of see what you're talking about. Like those things, you're talking about them, but is the movie really making a good faith effort to discuss them? Not really.
No, I mean, it as pure theory, like talking about theory, it's like, yeah, okay, this all tracks. But when you watch the movie, you're like, but there's a magical crab that's like like chilling out in like under a salad and is puppeted. By the way, the person that created, I believe his name was Paul Mantell, who crafted the crab. This is also his only screen credit, and it is as like crab creator, crab handler, or whatever. Every cut to this fake little puppet crab is joy. Like the puppet crab. If I was to like champion a revival of this and be like, we need to get revival screenings and we need to like commission somebody at Mondo to make a poster, you goddamn better believe that crab is going to be the biggest fucking thing on this poster.
You bet your ass. And I think the movie has done such an injustice by like the marketing material, because this is a movie so weird that there was no way to fucking market it as like, oh, this is the movie where Sarah Michelle Gellar's restaurateur character gets a magical crab and it turns her life around.
But is the crab magical, Travis? Is the magic coming from within her? Because what the way this goes eventually is that after meeting Christopher Durang's angel with the magic crab, Sarah Michelle Gellar has unlocked the ability to put her emotions into her food. Now, this is blatantly explained to us in the finale of the movie, but it can be inferred as the movie goes on, because when Sean Patrick Flannery's Tom and Amanda Peet's character, who has been dating Tom for like 3 or 4 times, she's started merging their schedules without telling him, and he's like, oh no, I'm afraid, because of course he's a man in a rom-com, he has to fear commitment.
Exactly.
So another completely recognizable, understandable trait in these kinds of movies. So they go to the Southern Cross because they're in a cab and they're supposed to be taken somewhere else, but the cab driver is Christopher Durang's angel character, who drops them off, and he's like, wait a minute, this isn't the airport. And he's like, and Christopher Durang's like, do I have to do everything for you?
And one of my favorite lines is Sean Patrick Flannery as Christopher Durang is driving away. He goes, "You're a cabbie."
So they of course end up right at the Southern Cross, and Sarah Michelle Gellar's outside moping because she knows the business is going to go down. So then Amanda Peet, who, you know, when they both exit the cab, they're on their cell phones because that's an instant. It's like, okay, they suck as people. That's an identifiable trope. They go in and they're going to have this dinner, or this lunch rather. And Sarah Michelle Gellar, you know, sees Amanda Peet and she's like, she's so perfect with her perfect hair and awful. And she's clearly like, just hates Amanda Peet right out the gate because she's, you know, magically in love with Sean Patrick Flannery. So she's making the chicken that Amanda Peet wants, but then the crab Napoleon that she had promised to make for Tom when they met at the farmer's market just magically appears on the counter of the kitchen. And so she goes out and serves these, and this is our first hint at like, this is what it's going to be. he eats the crab Napoleon and it is so mad. He's like, this is so delicious that he just doesn't care about anything else that's happening. Whereas Amanda Peet eats her meal and all of a sudden she is just overcome with just manic bitch truthiness.
Oh my gosh. Well, she fucking wilds out. I mean, it's like there's bath salts in her food. She just loses it. She starts throwing plates. She's smearing mashed potatoes on Sean Patrick Flannery's face.
And he doesn't care because the crab Napoleon's so delicious.
Yeah. This is where we start talking about this movie creating its own reality so confidently. Like, it's fully investing in its bizarre artifice. Like, neither of these people came in and ordered anything off the menu. Like, they don't even look at the menu and go, the Caesar salad, does that come with the anchovies, the croutons? Can I get a vegetarian Caesar? They're like, no, give me the crab Napoleon. By the way, crab Napoleon, not a thing. And then Amanda Peet's character's like, just make me a chicken paillard. And of course they're like, yes, of course, right away. So they just, they're just doing whatever the fuck. And it's like the movie is not at all acknowledging normal social contracts of like things you do in a restaurant where it's like, no, you look at the fucking menu and you order what's on the menu. And if you don't like what's on the menu, you go down the street to Chanterelle where you wanted to originally go. So, and you might think like, oh, well, yeah, a little thing like that here, a little thing like that there is perfectly permissible in movies. And you'd be correct. But this movie's doing shit like this in every scene where it's like, oh no, this is a social contract that you're blatantly violating. And you're not even like calling out that you're violating it. And that's one of the things that made me feel like I was on drugs while watching the movie. I was sober while watching this film. But there was a certain point where Sean Flatrick Pannery, that's his name, Sean Flatrick Pannery, when he eats some sort of, he eats the caramel eclair that Sarah Michelle Gellar's character makes for him in a later scene, and he's all horny. He's like, I feel like I'm loopy or something like that. I'm like, I feel like I'm like flat out stoned. Like, I don't understand what's going on. Like, you've constructed a version of reality that just simply doesn't make any sense to me. And that to me is like the biggest difficulty to overcome with this movie. Cause there's not a whole lot of like high stakes shit that's going on in this movie. I guess you could criticize it for being a little boring and low key. Well,
because all I want to do is talk about the magical crazy shit. But to a critical point that you're saying, there was a point where you were like, I don't know what the central conflict is, and the conflict. I said,
part of that was because the first time I sat down to watch this movie, I couldn't give it my full attention. There was something going on in my apartment that I had to address.
Sure. But you're not wrong up to a point, because we get that inciting incident of my restaurant is gonna close down, and SPF is like. That's the initials. SPF is over there like, I got to open this new restaurant. And those things get solved. Well, the problem with Sarah Michelle Gellar's, wow, it's SMG and SPF in this movie. Sarah Michelle Gellar's issue gets solved very quickly in the beginning because she gets magic powers. And of course, as soon as she starts cooking with magic, the restaurant takes off and it's incredibly popular and they're saved. You would think that would be the entire movie, would be how are we going to save the restaurant is a movie in of itself. That gets solved in almost the first act of the movie.
Yes. And then, you think, well, okay, well, now there's got to be some sort of like artificial tension introduced so that they don't get together. But there is a scene about halfway through the movie where he kind of blows her off when she asks him to come over to the restaurant one night, like for them to have a date. She's like, well, when I get off, you come over and I'll make dinner for you. And he dodges her. But he, later on that night decides to come over, and she makes dessert and they bang in a giant mist cloud on the floor of the kitchen.
She's also lying to him.
Yes.
Because the big conflict of the movie ends up being that they are both madly in love. It is love at first sight, that they're supposed to be together because Christopher Durang said so, and that they continually doubt their own feelings individually, not about each other, eventually about each other, but that they doubt their own feelings about this passion that they're experiencing. So they keep pulling back. But every time they get together and food is involved, that passion just overtakes them, and in magical ways. So in this sequence where he does finally come over and she's like, I'm going to make this stuff, she has this whole philosophy about like desserts, the whole point of the meal. So she loves making desserts. So she makes this like, I don't know, vanilla pudding or something. And and she throws some flowers in it from this
orchid.
It's a vanilla like orchid thing that he brings her. So she throws the flower petals into that and she mixes it up. And this magical dry ice fog takes over the restaurant. Some song off of the soundtrack starts playing and the fog encompasses the entire place. And they lean down in the fog, start making out, and they fog fuck in the restaurant's kitchen.
Right. And the only way that we know they fog fuck is because the movie fades to black. That's, it's if the movie
that's that language.
Yeah, exactly. If the movie's like, well, let's give them their privacy, and the camera pans to one side or the other and it fades to black, it's like, okay, we know they got down.
I mean, just cut to the train entering the tunnel shot. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
Like we know what this is.
that actually reminds me, coming back to, the movie having things on its mind and trying to develop themes. Like, I remember the train shot from North by Northwest being reused in a Sopranos episode. And there was another thing in this movie that reminded me of a Sopranos episode. There is a scene where Dylan Baker's character wanders into Sean Patrick Flannery's office and just starts confessing that he had this dream last night. They're worried about the opening of this swanky restaurant inside a department store.
Right. Well, we should establish that Dylan Baker's character's name is Jonathan. His name is going to be on the restaurant, and he's pretty much he's the face of the restaurant.
He sits down on Sean Patrick Flannery's couch, much in the sort of, I guess it's Jungian analysis way, where he's lying down, and he starts confessing, I had this dream about, it was the opening night of the restaurant, and I was on cloud nine. I was really happy, and I was wearing these patent leather shoes, and I looked down at my patent leather shoes, and I saw the face of my grandfather reflected in my shoes, and he was smiling at me. And I'm like, oh, this is like a Tony Soprano dream. Like you're describing this like very surreal image, like, the ducks flew away with my penis.
I don't know. Well, here's the thing. I'm going to get a little particular here. He's wearing his grandfather's shoes, but the face that he's seeing is Henri, which I believe is the name of the person who owns the department store. Like, it's a real department store.
Yeah, but the Jonathan Bendel is his name. Like they've created this fictional character. I believe that.
Okay, so it's because the place is called Henri Bendel.
Yeah, Henri Bendel was the name of the swanky department store. So he's like, I saw the face of my fictionalized grandfather, Henri Bendel, who is actually a real person.
Parse that, like.
Well, I mean, these are the locations they had available to them. Like, they shot in this department store in New York. Is one of their few locations they had, and they shot at night. So the department store would close for the night, and then they would shoot all night. And then they'd pack all their shit up and be out by morning. So it's like Clerks. It was like Kevin Smith using the quick stop at night and closing the shutters so that he could shoot all night and the quick stop could operate normally throughout the day. I mean, like, this movie, the budget I can find for it is $6 million. And it's like, okay, I can kind of believe that. And because everything else is shot on like the dinkiest Tommy Wiseau sets. It is so strange.
I mean, the sets are just well, it's the sets and the lighting, because like when we were watching it, and I was like, oh, wait till you see all the sets and stuff. When we get to the Southern Cross and we see that, you're like, this is like like The Room. And it's like, yeah, it's because it's this weird flat lighting in these super fake sets.
Yeah, they were very cautious of any kind of hard shadow or harshness in the lighting. So all of the lighting is very diffuse and very flat. They're just like, okay, we can see things in front of the camera. Light exists. Everything is well lit, but we're not making any like bold artistic choices with the lighting at all. So from a lighting and like cinematography standpoint, the movie is not at all interesting until they start doing a lot of their location shooting. Like, there's a great 2-shot. It's my favorite shot in the movie where Sarah Michelle Gellar and Sean Patrick Flannery are on opposite sides of the frame, and they were doing location shoots at the department store, and the camera is looking from the interior out to the exterior, which is behind. So they're looking at the big front windows of the store, and it's like, oh, finally, like an interesting shot. Like, characters are in a place that is inherently sort of dramatic looking. The lighting is dramatic. They're very nicely backlit. It's like, oh, it's doing something that's not like a dinky soundstage that just looks like a play set.
Well, even because earlier when Sarah Michelle Gellar goes to the department store, because the Amanda Peet earlier went buck wild and like broke a whole bunch of plates in the restaurant. She's like, these plates don't even match. She just starts throwing the plates around. Sean Patrick Flannery is like, I'll replace, like, come by the department store and you can pick out plates and I'll foot the bill.
You know what I love is he's like, call me and I'll pay for everything. It's like, No, motherfucker, pay for everything right now. Like, whip out the checkbook and make it happen. What are you? Like, no, I'm going to have you do the work to come down here.
She has to go into his safe space, his department store, which, symbolizes his sense of control. And she has to be a klutz and knock over the perfectly assembled stand that Ramos has been building. And that Sean Patrick Flannery has to be like, beautiful Ramos.
See, this is another one of these like violations of social contracts, because if Sarah Michelle Gellar's character was a real person, she would have been like, get this crazy bitch out of my restaurant right now. If she smears mashed potatoes in my face, I'm going to kill her. And you pay now and leave, or we call the cops. That's that's the social contract that the movie's breaking.
But when she goes to this department store earlier, that's when she gives him the magical caramel eclairs, and he gets super boned up. But instead, because this is a movie, what they do is they go into the restaurant space where it's going to be, and it's got this, and that's when Dylan Baker's character is like, it's like something out of an MGM musical. In walks Sarah Michelle Gellar. Sarah Michelle Gellar.
There are too many names.
Why are there? We have 2-3 named actors. So Tom and Amanda. So Amanda walks in, and immediately, because Sean, they both eat the caramel eclairs, and that's when she's like, I feel a bit loopy. And he's like, come on, I got to show you my restaurant. And so they run in, and then they start dancing like they're in a fucking MGM musical. A shadow band appears behind them.
Right. Well, like the flooring changes. Like it's very clear that we've entered a non-diegetic fantasy space.
It's like the sequence in Shape of Water.
Sure.
Like, and so it's like, okay, again, this is the kind of magic that, I get it. This is La La Land. This is that kind of thing. I would love for this to be turned into a musical. It seems totally so ripe for it.
No, I think it's really suited for the stage in so many ways. Like it really does feel kind of uncinematic in so much of its construction and visual language. It's like, no, this belongs in like a proscenium style setting. Like this is designed for that. It really does give you the impression that the director, as a filmmaker, Mark Tarlov, didn't have the best handle on how to make something feel like a real movie. This feels like an unreal film.
Yeah, I mean, we'll use terms like this feels like a movie made by aliens or made from another planet, and I actually think Simply Irresistible has one of the best arguments for that. It feels like a movie from another dimension.
Right. Like you think like, who allowed this to happen? Because you look at how movies are made or how movies were made. It's like, well, this was not a script commissioned by the studios. This is not based on an existing property. This is something that Judith Roberts and Mark Tarlov, as husband and wife, cooked up together. And Mark Tarlov, who is a producer that has worked with a whole bunch of people, he's worked with John Waters on multiple movies.
Yeah, the cinematographer of this has shot a bunch of John Waters movies.
Yep. And so, Mark Tarlov went to Arne Milchan, who is the head of Regency and the founder of Regency Films, and was like, well, I got this screenplay that my wife and I have been working on. And, Arne Milchan's like, well, okay, you want to put Holly Hunter in the lead. Holly Hunter's pushing 40 at this time. We don't see that as being a marketable film. And Mark Tarlov is like, okay, well, how about we do the lead from Sex and the City? We've gone through so many 3 named people. What the fuck is her name?
Sarah Jessica Parker.
Sarah Jessica Parker. Thank you. Sorry. Too many names, lady. Keep it. Got to downsize.
It's not everybody. The man has too many. There's too many names in this movie.
Agreed. So, Sarah Jessica Parker and Greg Kinnear were hired by Mark Tarlov and Judith Roberts to do a read through of this for the head of Regency, Arne Milchan, and evidently this so enchanted Arne Milchan, who's this Israeli guy who had a bunch of money. He's like, okay, all right, I see this is something we can make. But if I'm going to give you money to go and make this movie in New York City, you're going to cast the lead from Buffy the Vampire Slayer in it. You're going to take this 20-year-old lady and you're going to rewrite your movie to be from a 20-year-old's perspective instead, which entirely changes the context of the movie. So the process of how this movie went from inception to actually becoming a thing really warped it and twisted it. And so the final product is just so bizarre. And you'd think, like, with a movie this strange, like who okayed this? Like, who at 20th Century Fox said, yeah, we're distributing this? 20th Century Fox, I think, had ownership stake in Regency at the time.
Well, I mean, again, we could do 2 episodes on this movie, because I would do a whole episode just about how, they did a how did this get made about this. So
yeah.
Like, I mean, that's part of the interest about this. I mean, I assume that once you've got, but like understand people, this wasn't like the movie Sarah Michelle Gellar did after Buffy was done. This Buffy was still going on. It was still popular, and she starred in this. Like, so I'm sure if they were able to attach her early on, it's like, we'll make anything because, she's a popular name, like whatever. So the course of the movie is that, okay, they fog fuck, and now they are so madly in love. But, Tom is like, she's driving me mad. It's driving me crazy. At this point, Patricia Clarkson gets her hand on those caramel eclairs and she eats one. And she is basically having an orgasm on the couch next to Tom while she's telling him, like, you can't see her anymore because she's driving you so crazy. You can't think. You're scatterbrained. You're distracted, all this kind of stuff. And if you see her again, you're just going to keep going down that path. At the same time, when he's like, yeah, I can't see her anymore. Then she calls up her assistant and is like, listen, I need you to go down to this place called the Southern Cross and get a whole bunch of caramel eclairs. Because when we meet her and she first interacts with Dylan Baker's character, Jonathan, she immediately says, like, how do I look? I know Jonathan's going to be there. I want to look good. And Tom is like, what is it about him? And she's like, he just drives me. It's his hands. I just want them all over me. Like, she's immediately, before we meet him, horny for Dylan Baker. So whenever she's around him, she's just placating to his ego and like, and the first scene, cause, what is it? Tom says, like, he's really into immortality. He wants to believe that, this restaurant's going to be his legacy, that he'll live on forever. So she has an interaction with him where she's saying, you're going to be the face, not Tom, not the chef Valderon, the comical Le Poisson French chef.
Yeah, who we know to be an asshole. Like the movie sets it up early on that this French guy that they've hired to be the head chef, the executive chef at this Jonathan's restaurant, they're like, oh, okay, he's difficult. And so later on in the movie, he just bursts into Sean Patrick Flannery's character's office and is like, I quit. I spit on your knife. I spit on your countertop and all this stuff. And
he's throwing knives around into the walls and stuff and stabbing knives in the desk. So anyways, Patricia Clarkson's character is appealing to Dylan Baker's ego and is like, this restaurant, it's going to be your name on it. You're going to be immortal. And Dylan Baker's immediately like, I like you, Lois. You think you're like a man.
You think with your nuts. Yeah. Woof.
And we're just like, hey, a woman wrote that line. So that's all on her.
A woman is credited with writing that line.
Then she bears the brunt of that line.
Indeed. There's a whole lot. Again, this is like more breaking of social contract stuff where the movie likes to come up with its own sayings and its own little like truths about its world. There's this idea in the movie that's like, oh, men think about sex like, I forget what number it is, 238 times a day, which is like, they do the math, they're like, it's 4 times a minute. And then when men are thinking about sex when they play with their belt. Oh yeah, like everybody knows this is true in this crazy world.
Well, immediately, we're not even talking about the preceding scene. The person that delivers that information to Amanda is Lawrence Gilliard Jr.'s character, Nolan, who they're at her house. This is the only time we go into her apartment. We're in her bedroom because she's trying on a dress to go to the department store. And she's like, oh, show me, tell me which dress is okay. So we were like, okay, is this going to be the effeminate black gay friend who's totally, it's like, no, he's just a guy who's the sous chef.
He's standing there, by the way, in his USA shirt.
In his USA shirt.
He's got a shirt that just says USA on it. And he stands there. He's like, he picks up 2 dolls, like big dolls, like 2-foot high dolls. He's got one in each hand. He's double fisting these dolls akimbo. And Sarah Michelle Gellar's character is like, oh, please don't, whatever you're doing with the dolls, please don't do that. And he proceeds to ignore her request and then just starts smashing the dolls together in his hands while he's having this dialogue scene with her. I'm like, why, bud? Why are you doing it?
Another aspect to the pocket dimension that Simply Irresistible exists in is that Nolan is the only black person. There is no other black person in the world that this exists in.
Yeah, there is a Latin American man named Ramos, as Sean Patrick Flannery's character called him. And Ramos's only job is to arrange boxes of, like, I don't know, perfume or something, whatever it is. Great job, Ramos. Very organized.
That's beautiful. Who he is. I knew I recognized Ramos. He's in Starship Troopers. He's Shijumi. He gets killed when they first
Sure.
evade when they first evade Clendathu. I remember.
Wait, we can't talk tonight. This is what this movie does to your brain.
Remember Johnny Rico just going, "Shit, you me." So, yeah, he's in the boot camp with him. Anyways, I recognized him. So yes, this movie breaks our brains out of the speech centers in our brains, or like, because we haven't even touched. So eventually, through magical happenstance, it's going to be that Amanda is going to run the restaurant because the Valderon Le Poisson chef, he's gotten mad and has decided to leave. And this all happens when there has been the breakup, because this is a point where really good conflict comes in. You even noted it, and you were absolutely right, in which the conflict then becomes them openly. He goes over to her restaurant again. They start making out, and they start floating upwards to the ceiling.
Which is more crab magic, or maybe it's not crab magic, or maybe it's Einstein working behind the scenes. You don't know.
Well, we'll get into, because I believe the crab is magical, but it's not the source of her magic powers. So they float up to the ceiling, and she's very just like, yeah, okay, like this is what happens. We're in love. You're floating, and he's
go
like,
with it. Yeah,
yeah, and he's like, no, like you got to get me down. You did this to me. You're some kind of witch or something. You're a demon. He calls her demonic at one point. So he's freaked out. And this is all metaphorical for, he's like, no, I can't be in the middle of this because the way you make me feel, and now literally the things you're doing to me are causing me to lose control of my life, which it's like the metaphor of this in the basic rom-com structure, it works.
Sure.
Like it's genuine. It's just being executed in bizarro ways. So this moment of conflict where he's like, I can't be with you because you make me lose control. Goodbye. Well, then she comes back to his department store, of course, right when the French chef is leaving, and they have a little, tete-a-tete. And then that's when the chef leaves, and Dylan Baker and Patricia Clarkson are both there at the same time. And they're like, oh, this is the chef from the Southern Cross. And Tom is like, no, you can't hire her. She's a witch. She's a demon. And then they're like, Patricia Clarkson and Dylan Baker were like, you're a chef. You can step in for us. You're the one who made those eclair things that made us fucking horny. Like, awesome. There's an amazing moment where Patricia Clarkson says to Dylan Baker's character, like, well, no, we haven't even talked about that. She eventually...
Look. This is such an all over the place, like full of insane moments movie. And we got to come around to some sort of generalization at this point. Sarah Michelle Gellar breaks out all the magical powers to host this incredible opening for this restaurant. And a whole bunch of really insane shit happens. Really insane shit. We're talking things like she brings out a dessert course that is like a baked apple that when people cut into it, it farts this huge cloud out into their face. And they all start like, I don't know, it's pretty sexual. There is a course, like the appetizer course just makes everybody weep and start crying. And
well, because she cried into the food. Like she's stressed out because she can't, she's like, I don't know.
The French sous chef chewed her out.
So she cries into the food. And then when they serve it, everybody starts crying. And, she's like, oh my God, I made everybody cry. And they're like, no, look. And everybody's having huge cathartic realizations and monologues.
Yeah. My favorite of which is the one guy who stands up and he's like, could have been a poet or something.
Oh, he's like, I always wanted to be no, one guy's crying. He's like, I always wanted to be a chef. And I'm assuming his wife is like, I never knew that about you. And then, like, this other guy stands up. I'm assuming he's some like New York poet laureate or something.
So, yeah, he has a very professorial look about him. But like this movie is not unaware of the fact that it is silly and campy. It would be one thing for the movie to be blissfully unaware of exactly what it was doing. When you look at Tommy Wiseau's work, it's like, oh, this is a work of accidental competency. Like, oh, you were competent at doing something you actually had no idea you were doing. No, this has some, I think, authorial intent behind like making it silly and funny and campy and goofy. Like it's there. It doesn't seem like this is an accident.
No, God, there's so many things I just wanted to say about
I know, but there's I think a lot at this point that is better left for our listeners to discover. Like we recommend it.
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to spoil the ending of Simply Irresistible as far as like, because let me tell you something. I love the crab in this movie, maybe more than most things in movies. Every cutaway to the crab fills my heart with a joy that I can't properly state. And there can be nothing going on. It's just like, let's just cut to the crab and his little eye stalks are moving. I'm like, oh, just my heart. So eventually we find out the crab is not the source of her magic. It's her. It was always there. Apparently in the earlier drafts, there were hints that it was passed down from her mother, that there could be some kind of witch magic or something that's just inherent in her family. But that's not in the final version. So the whole point is that she puts her emotions into the food. The people who eat it feel her emotions. And by the end, she makes the farting apples that turn everybody into not like orgiastic horn dogs, but everybody now wants to dance.
It doesn't start the shunting or anything like that. But
it's classy movie horny where dancing is a metaphor for fucking.
You better believe it.
So everybody eats the fart apples, and Dylan Baker has to get Dylan Baker. I just want to talk about all the Dylan Baker stuff.
Well, the dream he had earlier comes back where he's looking. There's a shot of him where
he's crying.
He has his shoe. Yeah, he's crying. He has his shoe off, his patent leather shoe, which is very reflective, by the way. He's looking into it and he's like, "Oh, I'm granddad. I'm living up to your legacy." And then he looks over at Sean Patrick Flannery's character. He goes, "You're just like my granddad, except I don't hate you."
Yeah. He's like, "I love you. I hate my granddad, but I love you." And
really, I mean, it really is like it's a therapy couch moment for Dylan Baker's character.
Characters we've only met in this scene are having these giant emotional breakthroughs.
I was a poet, or that will never cease to crack me up. This is one of these movies where, like, the more I talk about it, the more I actually like it, because, like, my first watch of it, and I did watch it a second time this morning just because I wasn't able to give it my full attention the first time for life reasons, but I wasn't all that impressed with it because it didn't give me a whole lot of joy. And the reason it didn't give me a whole lot of joy is because this is a really befuddling movie. Like, it's throwing all this wacky shit at you at a rate that made me feel like I, again, was on drugs. It was like, oh, you just I got to take the ride.
You don't have enough time to process the last wacky thing you got before it throws something else at you. That's why this movie demands multiple viewings, because you don't have no human being has the processor in their brain to be able to process everything going on in Simply. Like, we cannot summarize everything. I didn't need, like, Dylan Baker's whole, like, you be the boss this time moment fucking kills me. Like, it's so funny. Patricia Clarkson and Dylan Baker are legit hot in this movie together. Like, amazingly.
They got chemistry. Well, I mean, Patricia Clarkson, anybody, she's just radiant in this film. But
sure, but so like this movie, as I was gonna say, I'm gonna spoil the final thing. So they eat the fart apples, everybody's dancing, and that's when they get together and like, yep, I love you. Let's dance, and we're gonna start magic floating and everything. And then we cut one last time to the crab. The crab who is somehow she's taken him into the kitchen with her when she was doing this. She's like, nope, he's my good luck charm. He has scuttled his way out onto the restaurant floor at some point earlier. We see him. And then when everybody's dancing together and it turns into this beautiful, like, big band, almost like a Busby Berkeley thing or something. Like,
it's direct references to a lot of Fred Astaire movies.
Yes. We cut down under the table to the crab. And the crab, beautifully, inexplicably, is wearing a top hat, a little tuxedo bow tie. I mean, the movie doesn't end on that image. The movie ends with an iris in to, it turns out, Christopher Durang's character, I guess, who was there. I didn't spot that.
He's he's in soft focus in the deep background.
Yes.
He's on stage and clapping. Evidently, he had more appearances in the movie as sort of a Greek chorus character, but that was cut.
He's the guy. I mean, he's the god that's coming in to fuck with these humans' lives, and he's Eros, like he's Cupid.
Yeah, but it's also kind of a Shakespearean riff. Like, this does feel like a Shakespearean, like, Midsummer Night's Dream kind of comedy.
Comedy
like,
of errors.
Yeah, there is a divine intervention thing. There is, it really did remind me of Midsummer quite a lot.
12th Night kind of stuff, and
yeah, exactly.
But my God. A movie that ends with a puppet crab in a top hat, tuxedo, and cane, I can't not love. Like, it's an ending statement to, like, this is what we did. If you didn't understand it, well, too bad for you, because we had so much fun creating this absolute, like, mental trip of a movie.
Yeah. And, there is this sense in the movie that, like, in the macro sense, this is a wholly predictable rom-com where it's like, yeah, I know they're going to get together. I know that there's going to be a moment where one of them tries to leave and then the other one makes this like grand romantic gesture and has to come running back. Like, I know all these things are going to happen. I know when they're going to happen, and I can feel when they're about to. What is relentlessly befuddling and baffling about the movie is like the smaller beats that defy formula. That's the reason to watch the movie, because like as a rom-com, it has the beats you might expect, but all the bizarre homage, all of the actual like play style writing, whether it's like, oh, we're trying to emulate like, you know, quirky stage plays from, you know, late 90s off-Broadway productions, or we're trying to emulate, you know, Greek theater, or we're trying to, you know, give our nod to Shakespeare here. Like, all of those little things make the movie way more pleasurable to dissect, because there's a lot going on here. And then, you know, you look at the things like the sets, it's like, why does this also feel so amateurish at the same time? It's there is a cloud, a vanilla fog of delusion that surrounds this movie in a lot of ways. It's like, oh, it's kind of delicious. It's kind of delicious.
To make an appropriate food metaphor, this is like you get a dish that you like, oh, I've ordered this dish 1,000 times before. I know what to expect with the flavor. But then the chef has thrown all of these absolute nonsense ingredients into it. And when you read it on the menu, you're like, that cannot be good. It's so disparate and like just jagged and spread out and fractured. What is this? I need to try this. And then you try it and you're like, what just happened to me? Like, I've had an experience that I've never had before.
Right. And for me, like that experience, at least for the first time while watching it, did not really equate to like, I'm having a joyful time. This is giving me glee. It wasn't like that.
I really equate this with something like The Room. That's not my shelf pick, but it is like the first time you see The Room, I don't know if you really get the full joy. You're just like, I am so confused. Like it's the exact same feeling where it's like every decision on the micro level is just throwing me for a loop. Like I can't get a hold of what this movie is doing. And that's really exciting to me. Like that's always really one of the things that fascinates me about particular movies. And Simply Irresistible does that. I mean, like you're saying, it hits the beats you expect. You could write out the very basic beat cards of this and it would read like every single rom-com you've ever seen. But it is the flavor of Simply Irresistible that is so utterly unique. And I think at this point, possibly inimitable. This movie will never get made again.
No, it is in that sense, a relic that is something that should be preserved. Like, we got to keep this movie in the conversation because the Hallmark Channel is not going to make movies this weird because it'd be a risk.
Even if they make it this way, I mean, part of the appeal is that they can make movies that weird, but nobody, like the mainstream, is not really going to see them. This is a movie that was distributed by 20th Century Fox starring Sarah Michelle Gellar while she was Buffy. Like that's another maddening element to this I'm so in awe of this movie. It brings me, like, I've seen it twice now and I can already tell you right now, like, I'm going to see this a third time. Like it's just an absolute wild ride that I have to recommend. Now, granted, people are probably going to walk away like you did and just be like, what's going on here? But please, I beg of you, stick with this and let it percolate in your brain. I'd watch it again right now. Fuck it. Simply Irresistible. Well, now we do have to head over to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And we encourage you to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your shelf pick for Simply Irresistible. And if you leave us a shelf pick, we will feature it in next week's episode. Travis, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Simply Irresistible? Please, I mean, this is such a challenge.
Well, I'm defying convention today by picking a TV show, and that TV show is called Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. This originally aired on the CW. This is the product of incredible, performer, songwriter, comedian Rachel Bloom. And the show is incredible. Like, it is 4 seasons, and you would think like, oh, this is a musical that had at least like 2 numbers on every episode and ran for 4 seasons on the CW. Like, what the hell is this? But it's a great story. And instead of being about, romance and relativity, it is about the lead character's mental health. Like that is the central conflict at all times. And it defies convention by constantly blowing up its own structure, having incredible homages to classic movie musical styles and classic movie musical sequences, and is so well put together from a directorial side. Like this was one of the least watched shows and lowest rated shows on TV during its airing, but the CW gave it 4 seasons because the show is incredible. Like it's really incredibly smart, and at its best, like when it's hitting really hard with the emotional beats, it's doing it so well and so intelligently that I legitimately in the 4th season found some episodes difficult to watch because I was like, damn, this is entirely too real in some moments. Even though the character is going into these sort of fantasy spaces and having these flights of fancy that look like old movie musicals, it's doing it all like, I don't know, most of the time pretty perfectly. I think it's actually achieving a lot of what Simply Irresistible had kind of set out to do and doing it like for real. It's a great show. Highly recommend it to almost everyone. Even if it doesn't sound like your bag, you should watch it. It's on Netflix.
Well, I had to do this movie because I have to believe if there is any movie that Simply Irresistible can quote as a reference, it's this. And it's actually appropriately based off of a stage play. This is Bell, Book and Candle from 1958, starring Jimmy Stewart, Kim Novak, Jack Lemmon, Elsa Lanchester. Kim Novak is a witch, and she's in love with Jimmy Stewart, who's her neighbor, but he's got a fiance, and she hates the fiance. So she casts a bunch of spells and stuff so that he'll fall in love with Kim Novak instead. It is notably considered the last time Jimmy Stewart played the romantic lead in a movie. It was a big blockbuster production at the time. I believe it was nominated for a couple of Oscars, may have won them. I don't know. And I have a certain affinity for this movie because I was in a stage version of it, and it's exactly what Simply Irresistible is aping. Like, I mean, this one, it gets to be because it's like, she's a witch. Like, she's got candles. She's got a magical cat called Pyewacket. My cat played the magical cat in the play.
Wow.
It's a delight. Like it's the perfect kind of like popcorn magical rom-com movie, but from 1958. Like it's like, yeah, they were making these movies back then. Like this wasn't like a new phenomenon. And it's and I'm sure because of the success of this, because it was quite successful, and I'm sure this actually spun out more of those types of movies. And so I have to believe, I've not read in any of the, we looked at multiple interviews with the writer and director of Simply Irresistible because they were fascinating, but I never saw them pull this as a specific reference. Whether they did it intentionally or not, it is Bell, Book and Candle. It's a perfectly light, fluffy watch. It's Jimmy Stewart and Kim Novak, for God's sake, and Jack Lemmon. Like you can't not have a good time watching this movie. Bell, Book and Candle. If you've not seen it, I give it a recommend. But now we do have to step over to the listener's shelf for last week's episode on The Serpent and the Rainbow. JT went with another Wes Craven movie, The People Under the Stairs, which we give the GenreVision seal of approval. Love that movie. Jetpack Jesus went for, I believe, another Steven Seagal movie, Marked for Death. Eric Fuchs had Live and Let Die, the James Bond movie, but that was an anti-shelf pick. One of the James Bond movies I've not seen. Mr. Milksteak went with The Believers from 1987. Stephen Nesbella went with The Ghost and the Darkness. Good movie. And Waldrumpus went with a video game, a computer game actually, called Gabriel Knight, Sins of the Fathers, which has Tim Curry as the lead voice actor. Thank you, everybody. Love having these shelf picks every week. More stuff to go check out, and that's what we encourage here on GenreVision. So thanks, and we look forward to next week's shelf picks. Now, we do have to do some calls to action real quick, but stick around because we've got some currently consuming coming up, where Travis is going to talk about the new horror video game Resident Evil 8, and I'm going to talk about the Amazon animated series Invincible. So we have announced our Q&A episode. Travis, we're doing another Q&A, and we love doing the Q&A episodes.
Indeed we do. This was requested by one of our listeners. Again, thank you very much. This is coming up in July. You could submit questions, any question for us to answer by going to GenreVision.com, looking at the main page, and finding the Ask Us Anything for the July Q&A. You can leave a comment on that post to ask your question, or you can use the contact page at GenreVision.com/contact. We ask you that you get your questions in before the end of June. That's going to be our cutoff, is the end of June. But we're really excited to do these Q&As. Every time we do them, they turn out really, really fun, and always promotes a great dialogue between us and y'all.
And we, as always, want to let you know, if you love what we're doing here, you can go become a premium subscriber at patreon.com/GenreVision to get access to a whole bunch of bonus material, including weekly pre-shows. We just did a pre-show that was actually a response to one of the comments that we had on last week's episode about the types of movies we've been selecting and their accessibility and the reason we've been selecting them. That was a comment from loyal listener Eric Fuchs. So we ended up kind of going off on a really big conversation with that, and you can only hear that if you become a premium subscriber at patreon.com/GenreVision for just $5 a month. You'll get access to that pre-show, all the pre-shows we do, and all the extra material that we do in general. We do extra stuff for GenreVision, our other shows, FinFlix and Third Time's a Charm. Whole bunch of material over there for our loyal Patreon people. And last but not least, if you want to help us out, one of the biggest things you could do is leave a review on the Apple Podcast Store. These reviews are worth their weight in gold, honestly. They are incredibly valuable in the podcasting sphere. Regardless, I mean, honestly, the last one that we got was a 1-star review, and it's like, hey, that adds to our review count, and that helps us climb up on the rankings. It helps the show get noticed. It can just help the show a lot. So if you love what we do here, or you don't love what we do and you want to leave a 1-star review, go to the Apple Podcast Store and drop it. If you do leave a written review, we will feature it here on the show. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom, 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 nom.
Travis, what's been on your plate?
I'm going to be very brief about Resident Evil 8. Resident Evil 8 is a continuation, a sequel of the past game Resident Evil 7. It is a first-person shooter, much like Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7 was a reinvention of the series where it took the basics of Resident Evil gameplay and reconfigured them to take place inside of a more distinctly American format, like really taking inspiration from popular American horror movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Evil Dead remake. It was kind of a murder redneck story. And while it eventually does, find some connection with the other, Resident Evil lore, like eventually, okay, there is a connection to the Umbrella Corporation, it largely left behind what was becoming so cumbersome about all these other Resident Evil games and found the heart of what was good about Resident Evil still. And I'm happy to say that Resident Evil 8 is both a continuation of that and also a rediscovery of what was good about what Resident Evil did in its bigger days, like when it got, more action heavy. And it's a great game that I won't spoil. If you've seen any of the trailers and any of the marketing, that's about a quarter of the game. There's 3/4 of the game you haven't seen yet, and it's good. You should play it if you like first-person shooter horror games. And I'm going to pass the baton to you, Drew. What have you been consuming? What's on your plate?
Well, I actually decided to dive into a show I thought I wasn't going to watch. This is Invincible, the adaptation of the Robert Kirkman comic that's been done for Amazon as an animated show. I saw the preview for it. I've not read the comics, but I'm aware of it kind of in pop culture because it was very popular at one point in the comic scene. And decided to check it out, and I was like, yeah, the animation's not great. It looks like most of those DC animated movies that they churn out that I'm not crazy about. But I have to say, I found myself really enjoying Invincible. In terms of, the fact that it's on the same platform as The Boys, which is another kind of deconstructionist, ultra-violent take on the superhero genre. I liked this much more than The Boys. And
wow.
I didn't dislike. I watched the first season of The Boys and I was like, yeah, I liked that, but did not feel the impetus to continue with it. This, I think it's only about 8 episodes this first season, and it's perfect. Like, it's the perfect length for what it is. It sets up a great mystery at the beginning. I think Robert Kirkman is much, much better at ripping off DC than he is at ripping off George Romero.
Okay.
Because there is, it's like a lot of these where it's like there are clear analogs for the heroes they're doing. The way I would pitch it is like, what if Peter Parker was the son of Superman and was also like a rich suburbanite kid? There's more to it than that, but that's our main character, Mark, who is his dad's Omni-Man, the most powerful superhero on the planet. He's a Superman, a proxy essentially, stand-in rather. And he knows that eventually he's going to get powers and he wants to become a superhero. And this is a world where superheroes and supervillains exist very commonly, sort of Venture Brothers-y in that way, which is cool. I like. And I like that the show is visually very bright. It's vibrant color. It's like, yeah, remember like superheroes are like bright yellows and blues and reds and greens and stuff like that. But then that's where the kind of subversion comes in, where it's like, it's an extremely violent show at times. The first episode ends with a massacre that is very much pointedly saying like, yeah, all this superhero fun stuff that you've been seeing here, it's going to get fucking nasty. And there's an interesting mystery. The characters are interesting because it's a guy that's got to juggle being a superhero. It's the Peter Parker part where he's trying to juggle being a superhero, but he's also, got a girl that he really likes that he can't reveal his secret identity to. It's interesting seeing how it plays with those tropes, because it's a show that's definitely about deconstruction in some way, but not in the like Zack Snyder-y grim dark deconstruction. I mean, it's a dark show at times. But it has a hopefulness about it that is reminded. It's like, yeah, superheroes are supposed to be really hopeful, and like, no matter what adversity they come across, they're supposed to be beacons of hope, of like, even in the face of the most adversity, you can still hope. And granted, that's all done, through like really fun, violent fights and ridiculous scenarios and stuff. Really enjoyed it. I was surprised. I ended up I think I binged the show over like 2 days. So I was like, man, I'm like really vibing with this. And I did not think I was going to. Phenomenal cast. I mean, Stephen Yeun and J.K. Simmons are the dad and son lead characters. I mean, Sandra Oh is the mom. Her character's great. Cause she's just a regular human who's married to the most powerful man in the world. I mean, so many great cast members, some who are, only on for an episode or two. Really good. I highly recommend it if anybody has any interest in that kind of, superhero stuff. It's good. I was surprised. I'm very happy, and I'm glad that it's already gotten renewed because I'm stoked for it. So now we do have to wrap things up with our
comment of the week.
And the comment of the week comes from Mr. Milksteak, who left the comment about that, as always, the GenreVision comments are just absolutely wonderful places where, genuine conversations are going down. And Mr. Milksteak happened to hit on the idea of a twins theme month. There's some of the titles was Twisted Twins or Twinning is Winning, which is pretty good. And I got to say, that one's getting filed away. I think that's a really good potential theme month.
I agree. I can see us doing that this year. So we will see. I really like that idea. I was surprised we hadn't thought of it before.
No, so thank you, Mr. Milks. That's part, this is a club. This is a movie club. We're all members here, and that's why we love our comment section. We get great stuff like that. So thank you, Mr. Milksteak. That is going in the idea bank. But we will be coming back next week with a Global Gonzo. It's been a while since we've done a Global Gonzo episode for May is Magical Month. This is Black Magic 2, which I believe is technically I guess like the Boxer's Omen is sometimes referred to as Black Magic 3. We're kind of working our way back in the Black Magic series. This is available to rent. It seems solely through Apple, through iTunes or Apple TV or anything. Please, we recommend renting this movie so you can watch it. And, if you don't have an Apple account, just make one real quick. And I think it's like $3.99.
Yep, $4. And this is a horror film from the Shaw Brothers. It looks like a really damn good time.
So we'll be back next week with Black Magic 2. Very excited, especially. Go listen to our Boxer's Omen episode before you come back next week. As always, we want to thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.